Assalamu alaikum. From City Special, I'm your host, Agha, Haider, Raza. Pakistan and the United States have had a very interesting relationship over the past few decades. From security relations to bilateral relations to diplomatic relations, we've seen a roller coaster ride between the two countries. But to really understand this relationship, I'm sitting in the office of the United States Consul General of Lahore, Mr. Zachary. With him, we'll have a discussion as to how he's carried forward this relationship between the two countries and what he expects of it in the years to come. Thank you, Consul General, for giving us the time for this interview today. We're glad to be in your office to hear what you have to say about your time here in Lahore as Consul General. Before we start off, I wanted to know that prior to postings, the Foreign Office, the State Department tends to give background details about their new posting. What was the thought process or perception you had of Pakistan before you came and before you started your duties here as Consul?
Thank you very much for having me on City 42. It's a great pleasure to finally sit down with you and conduct a full and proper interview. I know we've talked about it for a long time. Before I had come to Pakistan, I had served earlier in my career in India. I had served much more recently in Afghanistan. And so I had a fair degree of experience in the region, but I'd never been in Pakistan before. I knew it sort of through the perspective, the lens, as it were, of India or Afghanistan. And so I was very determined to come with an open mind and to really learn as much as I could about the reality of the country by being here. So of course I read a great number of books and articles. I read much of the diplomatic cable correspondence that had gone from our mission in Pakistan back to the department in the years preceding my arrival. I was coming out of Washington, but I was working on something very different. I was actually working in the Sudan Special Envoy Office before I came to Islamabad in 2013. So it shows that as Foreign Service officers, we truly are generalists, both geographically and then also substantively. But I at least had a background in South Asia that gave me a frame of reference.
You said that you were in Afghanistan and India. How different was Pakistan, or what kind of expectations did you have of Pakistan? Were they similar to what you were experiencing in India, or how did you perceive Pakistan at that time?
Well, it's 3 years on, it's difficult to remember. I guess a couple of the things that I thought would be true that proved not to be so true in practice were greater similarities with India than what I actually found in practice. In point of fact, everything from cuisine to culture is a bit more different than I thought. In some ways, those differences really favor Pakistan. For example, the quality of infrastructure that you have, roadways are impressive viewed against any regional standard. The meticulousness with which the city of Lahore is maintained stands in notable contrast to any other major South Asian city that I've lived in, and I've lived in a great number. The prevalence of meat in the diet is a significant counterpoint. It would be the same cuisine that I used to eat in northern India. It wasn't at all a difference there. So there are a lot of surprising small differences. But in the aggregate, one of the things I found and what I always find most endearing about South Asia is that people are great, and that's true in all three of these countries. Really, people are tremendously hospitable, very friendly, and very willing to engage you. And they're also very interested in talking about politics and history, which is all that I'm ever interested in talking about. So I do well here. I like this part of the world, and I hope to come back.
Sounds great. What exactly are your key responsibilities as Consul General here in Lahore?
Well, a Consulate General is essentially a satellite office of an embassy, and a Consul General is in that sense sort of a small-scale ambassador to a particular part of a large country. We don't have consulates in every country around the world. We tend to have them only in the largest and most important of our partner countries, Pakistan being one of them. So we have consulates in Karachi, Peshawar, and Lahore. So my geographic remit is the Punjab, exclusive of Rawalpindi division, which is covered by the embassy because of its proximity to the embassy. We do a little bit of everything. As you know from your interaction with our public affairs team, one of the very important things that the consulate does is to promote cultural understanding and people-to-people connections between the United States and Pakistan. Heavy focus on academic exchanges, university partnerships, education and student exchanges, student advising through the U.S. Education Foundation in Pakistan, which is a joint venture between the United States and Pakistan of very long-standing exchange programs. But also press interaction and engagement, helping to provide America's messages to the media so that there's a better understanding of where we're coming from and what some of our policies are. We also have a robust commercial advocacy program trying to build bridges between Pakistani businesses and American businesses. And so every single year, we're taking hundreds of representatives of Pakistani companies from Punjab to the United States for focused trade shows that expose them to the latest and best American products that they can use to grow their businesses, or to become franchisees here, or to become suppliers to firms in the United States of America. So building better business ties and understanding what the economy is and what it needs, that's also important. We also, of course, do the traditional government-to-government diplomacy, where we're engaging with the Punjab government and with a wide variety of political, social, cultural, and intellectual leaders based in Punjab.
You've touched on a lot of areas and a lot of work that the consulate does, though, but has there been any particular initiative or policy that's really caught your eye, that's really, that you've honed in on or that you've focused on during your time here as Consul General, though?
Well, I'm a political officer by background, and I was a political officer in Islamabad before I took this job. And really at the crux of what I've tried to do. But also the commercial side, frankly. I think there is tremendous, tremendous untapped economic potential in Pakistan. And I think that when we work to build bridges between American and Pakistani companies, inter alia through the Business Opportunities Conference, which back in June brought about 200 Pakistani businesses to New York City for focused interactions with American partner companies, we can help to shift the narrative about Pakistan in the international media and in international market perception, creating opportunities for investment and trade that grows jobs and that helps achieve all of our goals, whether it's stabilization or economic growth or ending poverty. One important thing I neglected to mention that we serve as a platform for here in Lahore is USAID. Pakistan is also unique in having a USAID mission that has offices within the consulates as well. So we're trying to tie into the provincial governments and make sure that U.S. assistance is responding to their needs specifically.
The United States plays a key role as far as Pakistan is concerned in terms of trade, diplomatic relations, bilateral relations, economic relations stuff. And the consulate also looks after the business community, as you just mentioned. How responsive have you found the business community in Pakistan towards the United States? I mean, how keen are they on sending their products, or what kind of areas do you see the business community working with the United States in specific areas, though?
Well, I see tremendous interest, and I see it actually from a wide variety of fields. We work heavily here, I think, in agriculture and agribusiness. There's a great interest, for example, in the importation of live American cattle, which has just recently become possible again. And we have some very high-yielding dairy cattle in the United States of America who, by virtue of coming from places like Florida and Alabama and Mississippi, Georgia, are climatically well attuned to Punjab, perhaps better than some of the other imported varieties of cattle. And with the great expansion in dairy, we see huge opportunities for Pakistani farmers to acquire these American cattle and dramatically increase their milk production. So I had visited Chima Farms up in Gujranwala some months ago. Great example of how a large-scale farm was importing American dairy cattle and really upping the level of their game by doing that. But I see that interest in a lot of fields. I mean, obviously the textile sector remains deeply interested in gaining and reclaiming American market share. And we know that textiles face many challenges right now. But we've helped to make with a lot of the textile companies in Punjab, helping them to find new avenues for exporting their goods to the United States of America. I also see a lot of interest here in franchising, the sale of American products, whether it's Hardee's, Cold Stone, or Fatburger, most of it food related, but also increasingly retail clothing brands, where they're looking for partnerships with the United States. And you see a lot of existing businesses who want to branch out into retail franchising as well. And so they're coming to us and looking for opportunities to go on trade delegations, go to trade shows, have queries made to matchmake with specific American businesses. So we're helping across all of those fronts. Our commercial service team, which works here out of the embassy, is busy every day fielding one or two of these inquiries, and maybe it's $100,000 here, $1 million there, $95,000 there. Over time it really adds up, and there are hundreds of these that we do every year, and hundreds more where we're just taking people to show them opportunities in the United States to either sell or purchase.
It sounds fabulous, the kind of work that the consulate's doing, that the embassies is doing. They're in all sorts of sectors and industries, like as you just mentioned, with the cattle farming, with student exchange programs. How come that kind of positive exchange, positive relationship at the business level isn't really reflected on the international level between the two countries. I mean, we still see that there's a disconnect between the two countries, and that the relationship, even though it's working towards a positive growth, do you think it's reflective of the kind of on-ground relationship that Pakistan and the United States has against an international relationship and the Foreign Office relationship between the two countries?
Well, I would actually question the premise. I don't actually think there is a disconnect. And, I've worked at this now both from Islamabad, where I was working daily with the Foreign Office and other sort of, the macro relationship, as it were. And now I've spent time working in Lahore, where I'm working more on the micro aspects of the relationship. What I've seen in the 3 years that I've been here is that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has gotten steadily better, and I think is actually in a very good place right now. I don't perceive a disconnect. In point of fact, what I do see is a fairly focused attempt by both governments to identify and work effectively on several mutually agreed priorities. And we have this thing called the strategic dialogue, which is 6 baskets, and I won't get into all of the technical aspects of that. But from energy to economic growth, to law enforcement and counterterrorism, to people-to-people exchanges, education, science, and technology, we're working very hard across all of these lines and at a very high level to achieve shared goals. And I think we have a lot to show for it. Just look at energy, for example, a huge need to which we are attempting to respond with massive investments. Over the last several years, we've added 2,400 megawatts of power to Pakistan's national grid through USAID assistance. That's enough energy for 28 million people. We've added 250,000 automatic meter reading meters to grid stations across the country, so people are getting much more accurate electric bills now than they were before, and the companies, the distribution companies, are far better able to manage load shedding. We estimate that we've been able to reduce unplanned load shedding, by 94% versus what it was just several years ago. And also in the private sector, General Electric is now investing in these 3 beautiful, big, gas-fired LNG plants that are coming up at Biki, Balochi, and Haveli Bahadur Shah in Punjab, bringing in the most advanced 9HA turbine generators that exist on the planet. Pakistan will be one of the first countries in the world to benefit from this technology. Low cost, high efficiency, adding thousands of megawatts to the grid. So on that area, clearly there's great convergence, and I would argue that on other issues as well, including ones that are sometimes perceived to be sources of conflict, in point of fact, when you dig a little deeper, you see infinitely more convergence than divergence. That extends to security assistance, where we maintain an extremely robust relationship, supporting the Pakistan military with training, with equipment, with CSF reimbursements, and with a variety of assistance that helps Zarb-e-Azam, for example, to be as effective as it has been, and where we're working closely with Pakistan to advance the cause of peace and stability across the border in Afghanistan. So, the headlines perforce will sometimes reflect temporary areas of divergence, but I would argue that those are completely outweighed by much broader areas of convergence.
Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is, why do you think that there's that divergence there? I mean, based off of what you're saying, the work the U.S. Consul and Embassy is doing is fabulous. I mean, it's helping Pakistan in areas where it actually needs help. And for example, obviously the energy sector, where Pakistan does currently even still have power outages, even ranging more than 16 hours in certain cities. Some places touching 18 hours, so that really doesn't give them much light. So I guess the question really is if there is so much work that's going on at a people-to-people level, at a government level, at a military-to-military level, why is that kind of perception not there, though, that Pakistan and the United States are the closest allies that would be out there? I mean, if you were to tell this about any other countries, relations between the two, one would think that they're best of friends, but that kind of doesn't really sit with Pakistan and the United States, that they're not really the best of friends, but despite so much work going on. What's the problem there?
A couple things. I think partly it depends on who you talk to. You see these survey polls that indicate that approval ratings of the United States are whatever, dismally low, 14%, 21%, whatever it is. I think those surveys lead over as much as they reveal, to be frank with you. I think if you scratch the surface, if you dig deeper, you'll discover much more complex and nuanced reactions to the United States than that would suggest. So perhaps people disagree with certain policy decisions we make or certain actions we've taken around the world. I don't think there's a generalized dislike for the United States of America. And I think once people start to learn more about some of the tangible things we're doing, and I'll concede we are not always as effective as we could be at explaining those interventions, I think then you start to see much more responsiveness and many more shades of gray than those survey results would indicate. So I think the picture is complex. It's very difficult to accurately measure public perception, especially with any degree of nuance. But I do think we need to do a better job of explaining the investments that we're making together with your government in Pakistan's future. We need to explain better, for example, the fact that we have no objection to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. On the contrary, we actively think that it's a good and beneficial project that can dovetail rather nicely with many of the investments that we're already making, that can help, as our investments have, to build a brighter, more stable, more secure future for Pakistan, one characterized by a much higher degree of economic integration. So I think it's very easy and natural for people to latch on, for media to latch on to the occasional area of disagreement that emerges. But areas of disagreement are inevitable in every relationship. I've worked in India, I've worked in Afghanistan, I've worked in West, to work in the UK. There isn't a country in the world with which we maintain diplomatic relations, even our closest allies, where the relationship is consistently totally devoid of occasional divergences or disagreements. It's inevitable.
You mentioned about how there's, there could be greater work on highlighting the investments in the people-to-people relationship to sort of boost and amplify the United States approval rating here in Pakistan. One area, since trying to focus on Lahore though, is the relationship between the consulate and the walled city project here in Lahore. So could you elaborate on that project? Where exactly has your consulate helped, and what kind of investments have been done to look after Lahore's culture?
Yes, indeed. One of the best things that we do overseas is the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, and it's a program that I have loved in every assignment I've been in, and I'm glad to see we're doing so much of it here in Pakistan. And in fact, much of it has happened right here in Lahore. One of the first things we did was to restore the Alamgiri Gate to its former glory, I think in 2010. And since that time, we've worked at the Suneri Masjid to restore that, and we are also currently supporting the effort to restore the Wazir Khan Mosque Chowk and to restore the historic appearance of the mosque. So we have a great partnership not only with Walled City, but also with the Agha Khan network, which is doing the work, and they do an incredible job. But not just here in Lahore, in Multan as well. We've restored some of the shrines in Multan. We have worked across the country, Mockley Hill, an AFCP project, to try to not only show respect for Pakistan's heritage, but to help Pakistan preserve and interpret our shared heritage, historic human heritage, for all time to come. And we're always looking for new good ideas, and so I've traveled around Punjab and trying to identify other areas where we could work. Inter alia, the ruins of Harappa, which are an incredible piece of human history that Pakistan is looking after for the rest of us. And so it would be worthwhile for us to consider investments of that sort down the road. Proud of what we've done, and I've been able to see a lot of those sites on that Shahi trail that they're building up through the walled city. Really impressive. And one of the ways in which I would say Pakistan has done a great job, walled city is a great model for how to take your old city and preserve it and interpret it for the next generation, while also making it more livable for the people who are there right now, and honoring its history. So it's oriented toward past, present, and future. It's a great example for other cities in the region to follow.
How do you see the government of Punjab helping in these projects though? I mean, are they facilitating it, or is it just solely a United States initiative with the Ambassador Fund, or does the Punjab government, are they also involved in these projects?
Oh, they certainly are. I mean, the walled city, of course, is itself an organ of the Punjab government, and so this is clearly a public of looking after their the world, and I think they've done a great job. And they've here now, and the people who are going to be living here 10 or 20 years down the road. You know, when you consider Pakistan has an urbanization rate of, I think, 3.5%, which is very high. So assiduous attention to things like mass transit, better urban infrastructure is really, really important when you consider the way the population is shifting. So not only looking after the past, but thinking about the future. I'm very impressed with the work that the Punjab government has done. And you don't see cities like Lahore in South Asia. I mean, really, I've lived in a lot of great South Asian cities, and I love many of them. But Lahore is so meticulously cared for with such good infrastructure. It really bespeaks a level of pride in the city by the citizens and a level of assiduity by the government in maintaining it.
One question that I had with you is, how has your interaction with Pakistanis been so far, though, especially the youth and students, though? And I want to follow it up with a question in terms of highlighting the student programs that the United States has with Pakistan, though. But I want to get a gist of how do you perceive the youth, though? I mean, what's your take on your conversations with them?
I'm incredibly impressed by the dynamism of Pakistani youth. And there's some very smart young people out there. You know, we have what we call Lincoln Corners, which are satellite cultural centers. We've erected several of these across the Punjab, and we're doing more. We're going to open one in Lahore at the Information Technology University several months down the road. When I go there, I use these as platforms to interact with students at those universities. Government College Faisalabad, for example, or BZU in Multan. And every time I do it, I get great questions, really insightful questions, by students who really clearly are well read on global affairs and on the United States of America, history, politics, the lot. Very impressive. When I go to things like Plan 9, Plan 10, in ARFA Software Technology Park, I see young people coming up with really, really great marketable tech concepts that they can sell and that they are selling to Sony and other companies. So you see a lot of this energy, a lot of this dynamism, and you know, we're trying to do what we can to help support that. You know, we give about 1,300 exchange opportunities in total every year to send Pakistanis, primarily young Pakistanis under the age of 35, to the United States for focused programs in their areas of interest. We have, at any given time, between 5,000 to 7,000 Pakistani students studying in the United States of America at university. We give about 30,000 visas to people every single year in Pakistan so they can visit the United States, whether it's for business or for tourism or for higher education. And we're working with the government to expand the number of PhDs that we jointly fund. So the government of Pakistan has now provided funding for an additional 125 Fulbright scholarships aimed at increasing the number of American-educated PhD candidates who can come here to Pakistan. So a lot going on and a lot to be excited about with Pakistani youth. I'm very encouraged by the future.
It sounds good. I mean, you mentioned ARFA Software Park
Yeah.
and Plan 10 that are being looked after in the incubators that they have over there for the tech students. Is there any initiative or any project in the pipelines to sort of connect Plan 9 or ARFA Tower with the Silicon Valley in the U.S.?
Well, in point of fact, we've already funded one program that brought a number of young entrepreneurs from those projects to Austin, Texas. So we brought them to Austin to observe the way in which that city has built this culture of entrepreneurship and to take some lessons from there that could be potentially applicable here. So that's one of the partnerships that we've done recently.
Another area that I wanted to jump into, because I'm trying to get into, find out the really grassroots relationship between Pakistan and the United States, is tourism, though. I'm sure you've seen a lot on social media, the northern areas of Pakistan, the mountains that we have out here. It's no less than any view that you would get in any place in Europe, though. Are those any areas, further areas to help boost, relations between Pakistan and the U.S. in terms of the tourism sector as well, or is that not tapped into yet?
Well, I see a lot of huge upsides in Pakistan, and one of them is the tourist sector, and I think focusing on northern areas is a bright strategy. Obviously, I think the security situation until the recent past has acted as a deterrent to many foreign visitors coming. But you are making great strides on security, and in the 3 years that I've been here, the situation has consistently gotten better. And if you look at the aggregate statistical indicators, this is a safer country now than it was a few years ago. That's certainly our perception. I think Zarbi Azib and the other operations have significantly reduced the threats. And so when you can turn the corner on security, like, for example, Colombia has done in the last 10 to 15 years. You can change the perception. And with the changing perception, you can start to capitalize on some of the great assets that you have, because tourists will start coming back, going to Gilgit-Baltistan, going to the northern areas, going to Swat and Chitral and these other places. So there's so much to see here. The foundational elements, whether it's security or more broadly for your economy, energy, I think are coming into place.
You speak about perception that needs to be changed on both sides. When you meet with Pakistanis, what kind of perception do you think that they have about the United States? What are their key questions that they tend to follow up with you or ask you about? Because we've had a really roller coaster relationship with the United States in the past 70 years or so. I'm sure they might not all be flowery questions that they have. What kind of sentiments do they have?
Well, again, just on the history of the relationship, I have to tell you, for close to 70 years, generations of American and Pakistani policymakers have invested in this relationship because they saw that it was delivering real results for both countries and that it mattered. And so, yes, there have been the occasional ups and downs, but I think any fair reading of the history would suggest that you have very long periods of strategic alignment and convergence, punctuated by much narrower periods of divergence. But in the aggregate, I don't look at it as a roller coaster ride. I look at it almost as a sailing tack, where a vessel goes to the right, to the left, capitalizing on the winds. But if you zoom out enough, look at it in the broad pattern, it's essentially a straight line. Because when I interact with people, they will sometimes ask about areas of disagreement that we've had historically. But more often what I see is curiosity. There's a real interest in learning about the United States of America. Typically the questions relate to things that are current in the media at the time. But often they're more fundamental as well. That was one of the reasons I was so impressed with the students when I interacted with them. They weren't just asking me about things that were in the headlines that week. They were asking me about fundamental aspects of American political culture, American history, American governance institutions. And there was a desire to know about those things. And I think motivated in part by a desire to see whether there's something in that model that might be useful here, which is good because democracies should always exchange best practices. Our institutions are very different, may or may not be applicable, but I see that curiosity as fundamentally healthy between citizens of democratic countries. And that's one of the dialogues that we hope to facilitate with all of our people-to-people exchanges.
You talk about curiosity and interaction with students, especially to sort of really understand their thought process, though. When Secretary Clinton was the Secretary at State, she visited Pakistan and went to Government College where she had conducted a town hall style meeting with the students. Even though she got a lot of stinging questions, the overall effort was highly applauded in the media space, where she sort of opened up her department to questions from Pakistani students. That hasn't been seen to be carried forward by the current Secretary, Kerry. Do you think there could have been more outreach on his part to sort of help with this kind of interaction between the students and the youth of Pakistan and the United States?
Well, Secretary Kerry also understands very well the importance of Pakistan and its relationship with the United States, and he's led our strategic dialogue initiatives both in Washington and here. And so I think his level of interest in the country is commensurate with that of previous secretaries, and certainly he has a very strong approach and is invested in that relationship. I heard only good things about the Secretary Clinton's time at GCU. It was held up as a model of the way we should do things. And I found that to be true in my own interactions. Clearly, I'm not the Secretary of State, but I've enjoyed interacting with Pakistani students. It's been a great experience every time I've done it. So I see why that was such a successful venue. And when it comes to answering the hard questions have good answers. So we are very happy to answer them.
But not only the Secretary of Clinton, a lot was also expected of President Obama when he was running his first campaign back in 2006, 7, 8. Pakistan at that time was, it still is a hot topic, but especially in those days, we had, under military rule, we had the Lal Masjid issue around the corner. There were security issues that were there. Pakistan was really discussed widely, especially in the presidential debates, both in 2008 and 2012. But yet the president never came to Pakistan, and even the last time we had the U.S. President Bush, he was only here for a few hours on a way through India. If Pakistan is such a close ally, such a close friend, and there's so much of a business relationship, a student-to-student relationship, how come it's not reflected at the president, prime ministerial level yet?
Well, in point of fact, Prime Minister Sharif has made at least 2 very high-profile visits to Washington in my short time in this country. In both times, he's been received at the very highest levels and has met with President Obama and has interacted with our senior policymakers. Secretary Kerry has visited, and we have actually a regular, steady stream of high-level visitors coming to Pakistan and engaging with your government on the relationship. So symbolism is one thing, substance is another. And I think focusing on the substance of it, Pakistan, as you know, continues to be a major priority for the United States of America. Always has been, really going back to the Eisenhower era. The other day, a friend of mine sent me a message on WhatsApp with this video of Eisenhower receiving President Ayub. It was Kennedy receiving Ayub,
Kennedy,
but Eisenhower came here. Eisenhower came here, and he watched a cricket match in Karachi. So, you know, this goes back a long way. And, you know, presidential travel is one important indicator. It's not the only one. We certainly do have a very robust and very senior dialogue with your government on all appropriate issues. And Prime Minister Sharif, through his visits to Washington, I think has really helped to promote and build that relationship.
I understand your part about it being a strong relationship, though, but again, going off of what you just said, you know, there's that picture with Ayub Khan and Eisenhower, and then there's the YouTube video that everybody's seen multiple times with the grand reception that Ayub Khan had at in Dulles, I believe, when the president JFK himself received him there. Then you had the very Jackie Kennedy visiting Pakistan as well. That kind of relationship, is it there today or is it not there? Where would you see that in comparison to, say, 40 years ago, considering that this kind of reception at the airport in DC was back in 1961, 62, I believe?
The pomp and circumstance that you saw in those old videos from 1961, the reality is neither we nor most nations literally roll out the red carpet in the same way that we used to in a more formal age. So watching that now is really a walk down memory lane. It doesn't attest to the relationship, it just, I think, attests to the evolving nature of diplomatic practice and mores. And, you know, in a very globalized world where leaders can talk on the phone, and often do, we don't necessarily do things the way we did 50, 60 years ago with that level of pageantry that you saw. That's very rare for anybody now.
Now I just want to jump into the U.S. presidential elections a little bit. The United States is seen as the flag bearer for democracy in the world, with the kind of setup that they have, with the kind of voter turnouts that they have at their elections. So far we've seen a very interesting U.S. presidential campaign. How do you see the presidential campaign narrative?
Well, you know, President Obama and Secretary Kerry and a variety of leaders from across our political spectrum, including leaders of the Republican Party, like Congressman Speaker Paul Ryan, have made very clear that much of the divisive rhetoric that we have heard in this year's presidential primary season does not reflect our values as Americans, and it does not certainly speak to our policies, and it doesn't speak to the values of most people. And President Obama went to a mosque and Islamic center in Catonsville, Maryland, very deliberately to make this point right there, that Muslims, for example, like all immigrants, are an integral part of America's fabric, and that their success in the United States of America in so many diverse areas has led to the success of the rest of America, to our entire national project.
It sounds good, and I understand this is the Obama administration policy, and he made a very obvious turn towards the Muslim community right after his election. I mean, we can't forget the Cairo speech he gave back in 2009. I think it was one of his early speeches on, and it was a deliberate speech to sort of disconnect from the previous administration's relationship towards the Muslim community in the world. But given the fact that we've got a Republican presidential candidate who has made very stinging remarks against Islam and the Muslim community, he has a 50% chance of becoming the U.S. president. So how difficult is it for U.S. foreign policy to have one administration work so closely towards working towards the Muslim community, as President Clinton said, I believe last night at the convention, that, you know, if you're a Muslim who hates terrorism, we want you. We want your vote. You know, so how difficult is it for the State Department to sort of work around these kind of two opposing narratives?
Well, you know, it's too early to say what's going to happen in our presidential election, obviously. But I think when we engage around the world and we engage governments who are accustomed, as we are, whether democratic or not, to some of the rhetorical excesses that can characterize the political process, there is an understanding that at its core, the administration wants to do precisely what President Obama, Secretary Clinton, Speaker Ryan, and a variety of other figures have consistently said, which is to work closely with our allies around the world to eliminate and address shared threats. And it's very clear, just from reading the headlines of the last few months, that no country is immune from the scourge of terrorism, and that by working together effectively, we can best eliminate and contain it, because it's a threat to everyone. And indeed, few have suffered more than Muslims themselves, in particular at the hands of the so-called Islamic State and other forms of extremism of that nature. Pakistan, of course, has paid a huge price in the war on terror. And it is Pakistan's fight just as it is ours, just as it is Turkey's, Belgium's, France's, Iraq's. So we work together. And I think at the end of the day, American politics, American governance has almost always been characterized by a very high degree of pragmatism in practice. And that's why our foreign policy, viewed again from sufficient distance, comes across as rather a straight line, with temporary zigs and zags resolving themselves into a fairly consistent direction over time, and why continuities rather than discontinuities tend to characterize the substance of our foreign policy.
You seem very optimistic and positive in terms of especially the Pakistan-United States relationship. I mean, obviously the consulate's done fantastic work. How exactly would you, if I had to, you know, ask the question to you, how would you sum up your time out here in Pakistan in the last 3 years?
I've had 3 great years of education in Pakistan. You know, I'd like to think of myself as a South Asia specialist. I don't know if I really qualify, but I've served in India, I've served in Afghanistan, I speak Dari, I've lived now for 3 years in Pakistan. And I read constantly about the region, and it fascinates me. And I think I'll maintain those interests even after I go to London. But my 3 years here has been a great education. And it's been great because I've been able to spend relatively quite a bit of time here. Most American diplomats spend a year, maybe 2. I've been able to spend 3, and I've been able to spend it both sort of looking at the macro relationship in Islamabad and then down here at the grassroots in Punjab. So it's given me a great perspective and a great education. And I think I leave here, as you said, very optimistic, not only about the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, which is a strong relationship. It has been for 60 years. It's going to be, I suspect, for the next 60 years, vital to both countries. But also optimistic about Pakistan itself and its trajectory. The security trend lines are good. Energy trend lines are good. Even though there's still plenty of load shedding, I see a fairly clear and logical pathway to closing that delta between production and demand, and then fixing transmission and distribution. And I do see tremendous economic potential in this country. I've seen it when I've interacted with business people across this province, and I see it when I interact with the next generation of Pakistani worker, the young folks in the colleges and universities and the tech parks. There's a lot that you have to offer, and I think the narrative is going to start to shift in the next few years if you keep making the sort of progress that you have been making. And I think that'll really help, not only to shift optics, which are important in how people perceive you, but also the reality on the ground.
Your office, as we talked about earlier, has done fantastic work with the city district government and with the Punjab government, especially when it comes to the city of Lahore. What exactly are you going to miss the most from Lahore, considering that you've been here for approximately 2 years, 3 years now?
Well, I think I'll most miss the sense of purpose that came from leading a really excellent team of people here at the U.S. Consulate in Lahore as we work to advance all of these goals across the spectrum, from assistance to people ties, to business and trade, to relations with the Punjab government. I'm going to miss being plugged in every day to the encouraging trends that I saw emerging from Punjab, from Lahore, which we talked about. It'll be that sense of connection that I'll miss, frankly. But I hope to come back at some point and see whether I come back as an official or come back as a tourist. I want to come back and check in again to see how all of those trend lines kept on going upward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zachary, for being with us today, and it's encouraging to hear the views that you have about Lahore after 3 years, and we wish you all the best for your postings up in the United Kingdom, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.